Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to recreate a ChatGPT message bot in Laravel end to end. We'll go through the direct integration with OpenAI and connecting it all to a Laravel application. Let's get started. So this tutorial is starting with the idea that you have basic knowledge on Laravel, having PHP installed locally, Composer installed locally. We'll include some instructions in the video description, but basically we're just going to start this project out as a basic Laravel created application from the Laravel template, and now we're going to go from there. So the first thing we're going to do is add our OpenAI API key into our environment variables folder. So we're going to need this secret key in order to integrate with the OpenAI API. So we'll first add it in the .example file, and then we'll add it actually in the .env file that the project reads from. So right after this equal sign is where you're going to put your OpenAI API key. There'll be a link to a short on where to actually find that API key. But the most important thing to remember about this piece is you are going to need to have billing enabled in order to actually integrate with the API. So I've added my own key into the .env file. It's obviously a secret, so I'm not showing you exactly what that is. But the next thing that we're going to want to do after we've added the key in is create an OpenAI config, and we're going to read the environment variable from the env file in this config, and that is actually the best practice on referencing it in PHP. So what we're going to do is just say this is a PHP file. Then all we have to do here is just return the API key, we'll call it, so that we can reference it from the config in our code. And then we're just going to call the actual env API key that we had. So OpenAI API key, and this will create our config that we can use to reference when we're actually integrating with the ChatGPT API. Okay, so now that we have the OpenAI config built, we're going to build the controllers. So we'll build a new Laravel controller called ChatGPT controller.php. So we're going to create two endpoints in this controller, one to actually serve up the view that's going to hold the messenger, and the other is actually going to be where we integrate with the ChatGPT OpenAI API. So first thing, we obviously need our PHP tag. Let's give this the namespace that it's in. So app HTTP controllers. Okay, we're going to get our use statements in to give us our imports that we need. Okay, and another one, use eliminate HTTP. Oh, sorry, this one's going to be support slash facades HTTP. Okay, so first we'll create our class. We'll call it ChatGPT controller. This is just going to extend from the controller class, built-in controller class here. Okay, so here are the two main endpoints. The first one's going to be just the endpoint to serve up the view. We'll just call that public function index, and we're just going to return the view in this function. So we're going to build the view here in a second, but we're just going to call that view. When we do build it, we'll call it chatgpt.index. It's a good name for the view. Okay. So this next function is really one of the key functions of the entire application, and this is going to be the function call to actually call the ChatGPT API from OpenAI. So let's first build the endpoint. Say public function, we'll call it ask, and give it the actual request that's going to come in. So this is going to be a post, so we'll accept the request here. Okay, so when we accept the request, we're going to need to take the input from the user, and we'll just call that prompt. So we'll call the variable prompt, and then from the request, we're going to actually get the input field prompt that's coming from the submission. And then this is going to return the answer from ChatGPT. So we're going to create this function. We're going to call it ask to ChatGPT, and that's going to take the prompt that's being asked. So now we actually have to build that function. This is going to be a private function. Call it ask to ChatGPT, and it's going to take the prompt. And here's where we're actually going to call the OpenAI API. So we'll take the response. It's going to be HTTP without verifying. Okay. So here's the details of the call. We're going to send with headers. And I'll link the OpenAI API documentation, but this all comes from the OpenAI API doc to integrate with the ChatGPT 3.5 API. So authorization is going to be bare, and this is where we're actually going to get that config. So our config, OpenAI config that we just created, and that field we called API key. So that's our authorization. The second header that we want and need to send is the content type, which is typical of a lot of APIs. We're just going to send the application.json. That's what OpenAI is expecting. Okay, now here's the part where we're actually going to post to the endpoint. So post, and the endpoint is https api.openai.com/v1 chat completion. So this is the actual chat completion. This is in beta right now from OpenAPI. Again, the OpenAPI docs are going to be linked in the description below. Okay, so the model that we want, something that needs to be posted in the body. This is going to be GPT-3.5-turbo. Okay, and this is the message that the user is going to submit in the chat box. Okay, needs to be an array, and we're just going to send the single message. So we need to send the message as well as a role. There's a bunch of different roles. Again, you can look through the OpenAI API, pick out the role that's best for you. Right now, we're just going to use the defaulted user role. If you guys want another video where I go through explaining what those roles are, I'd be more than happy to do that as well. But for now, we're just going to use the base user role. Then we're going to send the content. And the content is just going to be the prompt. And then if we go down, the last thing we're going to send is an important variable in terms of usage, and that's going to be max tokens. So this is how you're billed in OpenAI. If you don't give a max amount of tokens, it will just use up as many as it needs to answer the question. By keeping a max amount of tokens, we can ensure that we're not going to go over any sort of crazy usage by asking a question, having ChatGPT generate a super long answer. Again, this is an optional field, but I'm adding this here so that my usage doesn't go over. And again, in order to get this working, you're going to have billing enabled on OpenAI. So just be careful. I would definitely recommend setting the max tokens for at minimum when you're developing to get this working. Okay, and then the last thing is we're going to return the response. So the response here is going to be JSON, transform the JSON back, and the response is actually sent in a choices array. We're going to take the first of that, message and content. So just as a quick reference to the API that we're integrating with, again, this will be linked in the description, but we want to integrate with the chat completions endpoint. So again, we're sending the same requests model, GPT 3.5 Turbo. Here's the message, role, content we're sending, which is our message. Again, you can use the user role, which is the one we're using. There's system role. They're all different kinds of roles. And again, this is how we're mapping our response back to the choices, the first one in the array, first message, and again, the content that ChatGPT is actually responding with. Okay, back to the code. Looks like we're missing a few semicolons, one here and one here. Okay, so now we have the endpoints created successfully. So the last thing we need to do is actually create the views to serve up this ChatGPT messaging box. So we're going to go into the views page. What I'm going to do, this is what I do in a lot of my Laravel projects, is just create this basic layout that I take from application to application. So I'll just kind of paste this in and walk you through what this layout's doing. We're going to create a blade file, and I'm going to paste this here and walk you through it. Okay, so this is just our basic meta tags here. Our title, which will appear at the top, and our links, right? So these are the important things. We're going to use jQuery, we're going to use Ajax to communicate with our endpoint we just set up to talk with ChatGPT. I'm going to use Bootstrap, so I'm actually using a messaging box that I got from a Bootstrap example website, which I'm going to link in the description below as well, and then our actual app.css that we can use to put in any CSS that we want for our application. Okay, then we have our body, and then it's actually going to yield the content. Okay, so on our actual messaging page, we'll tag the section with content, and it's just going to drop right in here. And then on that page, we're also going to have access to all of these links, including jQuery, Bootstrap, our CSS, so that we don't have to keep reinstantiating them on every single page. Okay, so now we're ready to get the core view built. So the core view we're going to serve up in this folder inside the views. We'll just call it ChatGPT. And again, this now needs to match here. So we need to make sure this file is called ChatGPT and we need it to be an index file. So we're going to name this view index.blade.php, and that should serve up the view that we need. And what we're also going to do is we're going to get this application started so that we can verify that everything in the view is working, and we'll actually be able to test what is working and what is not. So we're actually going to have to cd into the directory first. Okay, now we're going to serve up the application. I'm just going to pull that to the side here. Before we actually navigate to the page, we need to set up our routing. So we have our controller routes. Now we actually need to set those two URLs in our application. And how we're going to do that is we're going to go to routes, and we're going to go to the web URL. And you can see the Laravel application, the project has already set this up by default. So it actually serves up the welcome route, the out of the box Laravel application, and we need to set up our routes. So our first route is going to be the view that we set up. We'll set that up as a get. And that is going to serve up ChatGPT, and it's going to correspond to our ChatGPT controller class and our index function in that call right here. So that's how the route's going to correspond to the actual call. And then we're just going to give it a name here, ChatGPT.index. Okay, that's perfect. And then we're going to do our post routes. This is going to be the one that we actually post to ask ChatGPT what we need to ask it in our AJAX call. So this is going to be the ChatGPT controller as well, class ask, and then we'll give this a name of just ChatGPT.ask. Okay, one semicolon here, and then we'll also need to make sure we include the ChatGPT controller as part of our imports here. So HTTP controllers and ChatGPT controller. Okay, now our routing should be set up perfectly. Okay, so now that we have our routing set up, let's actually pull up our application and see if it's working. So we have the out-of-the-box Laravel landing page here. Let's navigate to ChatGPT. Okay, nothing served up now, which is fine. We don't actually have anything on that index page. So let's just test that this is working. This is working. Let's see if we can get something landed here. And okay, so we have our routes set up correctly. Now let's actually set up the views in this application. Okay, so we'll head back to the index page. First thing we're going to do is just extend from our layout, right? So layouts.app. Okay. And then the next thing we're going to do, and remember in our layouts page, we have to say that this section is the content. So this is actually what's going to be served up as content. Okay. There's our content. Now, what we'll do is we'll create a section here. We'll give it a background color and the height. And again, I'm taking a lot of this from the Bootstrap example for a messaging system that I'm linking in the description. So a lot of this is just built off of that. You can use whatever designs you want from there. Okay, let's see if we have a good section here. Not exactly as I was expecting. So let's go back. Oh, it looks like we didn't end this section, which is going to leave us not where we want to be. Okay, let's try refreshing that now. There we go. Okay, so now we have our background. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the example that we're actually building off of. So this is what I'm trying to build off of here. Something like this, a live chat box. We'll have ChatGPT on one side, and then we'll have our users on the other side. So if we pull the code back up, we'll continue building off of something like that. So based off that code, I'm going to create a container. Give it some padding here. Close out this div. Okay. So the next thing that I'm going to do is actually take some of that code here and refactor it. There's nothing wrong with this. This is all to be used for example. So if we take some of this code, we show the actual code here. Okay, I'm going to take this top section and then kind of build off of the rest. So it looks like we need a card as a border radius. So I'm just going to take the first top half of the card, this live chat piece. We'll kind of go from there and do some refactoring, okay? So we have the card. Okay, let's see if we can get something here. Okay, so we have the live chat piece. Let's actually wrap this in a smaller container here. So we don't want it to take up the whole length of the page because that seems a little bit big for the actual chatbot. So let's, and again, all this code will be available for you. Okay, we'll close that out. Okay, let's see how this goes. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Let's do one more thing. Let's actually put this in a row. Give it a deflex, and we're actually going to justify this content center. Okay, let's pull it back up. Okay, so now we're looking like we have the top of the chat box figured out. Okay, so we now have some of the code formatted. So let's make a couple changes here. Instead of saying live chat, let's say ask chat GPT here. We'll save that. Okay, some other changes. Let's make this background color the same background color of the actual chat GPT. So I pulled this offline. We have A67E here. And let's see how this looks. Let's see if we can. We'll probably need to remove this info here as well, as that's the out of the box blue from Bootstrap. Okay, let's see what this looks like here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so it looks like we have the top of the chat bot built. Now let's actually build the lower half of the chat box. So again, let's close this card piece up, which is the top piece of the card. So we have the header here of the card. Now let's actually create the card body. Okay, so we'll give this the card body class, and we'll give this an ID of chat box. The style, height, overflow. I'm going to expedite this piece and just kind of show you the final product here in a second on what we're working with for the body, so you don't have to sit and watch me type. And again, all of this code is available in the GitHub repository link below. So here's where we are now. One of the key things that I did was drop a couple images in, an avatar image and a ChatGPT image. Again, these are both available in the repo as well to be used in the messaging box. And I basically used the message box example to create three key things here. One is a ChatGPT message. So this is the icon text and avatar icon. I can pull this up. This is this main component. And then I created a ChatGPT text component as well, which is this box down here, which uses the ChatGPT icon, margins it to the opposite side. And then this is the actual form that we're going to use to be submitted, right? So this is the Ask ChatGPT form, the type of the question, and then the send button here below at the bottom. So you can use all this code to create your own bot or whatever you want in terms of chatting. Okay, so now some of the key pieces here. We're actually going to have to write the script to submit the form. So this is a key part of the jQuery that we're going to write. So we'll create a script here. Okay. And in the script, we're going to handle the form submission. So we're going to say document dot on click. So when the submit button's clicked here, this one right here, we're going to get it by ID. So again, jQuery hashtag and function E. So the first thing we're going to do in this function is we're going to prevent it from submitting. So we don't actually want the default behavior because we're going to use Ajax because we don't want the page to constantly reload when we submit the form. We want to load in the new message. We want to keep the page the same. And we're going to make the call to the Ask ChatGPT endpoint over and over again without actually reloading the page. So then what we need is to actually send the form data to the backend. So we're going to say form is equal to this. So So we'll do hashtag ask ChatGPT form, and we'll get the form data here. So I'll actually serialize it here. And since this is a text area, what we'll do is we'll actually just reset the text area before we submit the form. That way we don't have the text remaining in there waiting for ChatGPT to respond and things flow a little bit quicker. So we're actually going to get the text area here as well. We're going to say, find us the text area on the form with the name equal to prompt. So we'll have this form reset. Okay, so this is the key piece of functionality that we're going to write to actually generate the chat box message. So now we actually need to generate those messages back and forth from one side to the other. So we're going to write this function called generate chatbot message, and it's going to take two variables. One, is the message from ChatGPT or is it a user message? And then the actual text. And this is where we're going to make a key transition here. We're actually going to remove these two. So these two boxes, these two chat boxes, we have them here for example, but we're actually going to use the HTTP template element so that they stay hidden on load. And then we can just use that template to load in each corresponding message. So how we'll do that, we'll create the first template. So this will be the user template. So we'll call it user message box template. And we'll close that out. Okay, so we'll actually take the user icon code here and we're going to remove it completely. Okay, and we'll walk you through why and what we're going to do from there. Okay, so now we have this code, it's formatted. We're going to remove the text. So this is now a template. And then we're going to do the same. We're going to create a second template here, but instead, this is going to be the ChatGPT message box template. Okay, so this way in our jQuery, we don't have to keep reinstantiating these giant objects over and over again. We basically just say, hey, give us the template and replace this code. And that's the code we're going to replace is really just the message because it's the same box every time. We just need to change the text. So we're going to remove that. And then that's going to leave us really with just this chat box with the form outline. Okay, so now from here, what we're going to do is we're actually going to populate these templates, right? So once the question is asked, we're going to generate the chat box message. Okay, so the first message we need to generate is actually from the user. Okay, so we're going to generate a chat box message before we send it off to ChatGPT. Is this a ChatGPT message? No. And then we're actually going to send it the text area value that we pull off the form. So this is what the user has typed, and then this will be used to populate the user's question in the text box. And then we'll reset the form like I talked about so that the box clears out while we wait for ChatGPT to answer. Okay, so let's actually write this function now. So the first thing we want to do is get the proper message template, right? So let's find the template that we need. And we'll use a ternary for this. So just a quick-handed if else. So if it's a ChatGPT message, right, we'll read the first variable name, then we're actually going to want to pull this template, right? So we'll pull the second template, HTML. And if it's not a ChatGPT message, well, we'll need to pull the user template then, because we know that if it's not ChatGPT, then we know it's the user. We'll pull the HTML from there as well. Okay, then the next thing we need to do is we'll just say, here's the message box we want off of that template. And we'll say, on that message box, again, we have them both named the same. We have a message box text ID and the message box text ID. So we're going to say, in the message box, find the message box text element and populate it with the message text that was sent, right? We'll rename this message text instead so that it is a little more clear than just a message. So if the user asks, this will be the user's question. If it's ChatGPT, this will be its text that it's sending back. And finally, we have to append this on to the existing chat box. We're going to append this message box, right? So now this, anytime a question is asked, it'll be pushed on to this element over and over and over again, right? So we'll just keep appending new messages and responses. So that takes care of the user's question. Now the last and final thing we need to do before this is complete and we have a full working ChatGPT chatbot is just make that call to OpenAI. So completing this integration end to end, we're going to do an AJAX call. So we don't have to reload the page. This is our post that we created. This is our URL of the ChatGPT ask endpoint. So this is what's actually going to forward off to OpenAI. We're going to pass it the form data that we serialized up here, which will be the question from the prompt. And again, now the prompt will be pulled in on this endpoint, and it's all going to pass forward, and then we'll get the response from ChatGPT. So again, what do we need to do? When we're successful, we're going to grab that, and it's going to be the answer. And then we'll just generate the answer from ChatGPT. Yep, it's a ChatGPT message, and here's its answer. Okay, so now let's see if it works. This is it, the end-to-end working example. Okay, so we reload the page. All right, now let's just see the working end-to-end example. Let's just ask ChatGPT, what is PHP? Okay, let's send this off. Might take a second to get a response from OpenAI. And there you go. So there's your ChatGPT response coming straight from OpenAI back into the chat bot. We can ask it as many questions as we want, get a response. Again, all this code is available in the GitHub repository. Use it to build off of, use it for inspiration. Let me know what you end up building. Like and subscribe this video if it helped you. And again, comment with any questions or anything you run into, and I'll be happy to get back to you. Thanks everybody for watching.